Hi, I'm Alister Benn and you're watching Expressive Photography. We're back in the studio today because basically I'm not here. I'm away on a private workshop in the west of Scotland for 10 days. So we're going to be in the studio today looking at colour versus black and white versions of the same photograph to see how they differ. And I know that sounds obvious, but you know, how they differ from each other, how differently they express the different emotions that we either experienced at the time or the different things that we're trying to articulate. Now, I'm making this video today partly because as I said, I'm away for a few days, but also on the Expressive Photographers forum that I run, the members forum. We've been having a black and white month. We've been looking at black and white photography for the entire month of January. And so black and white photography is very much on my mind. And I wanted to go back to this photograph, which was taken in 2014, which at the time was one of my more popular, certainly, and successful colour photographs. Obviously, back in 2014, we were very much in that period of photographic development where we're trying to overcome the shortcomings of our digital cameras and the software. So there was an awful lot of blending going on. There was a lot of adding glow, and the fashion of the day was to make images that were larger perhaps than the experience that we actually had in the field, even though initially we were trying to make them more like the experience we're having in the field just by making them kind of more majestic and more grand. Obviously, when you're stood in a location like this, looking at this fabulous mountain over this beautiful meadow at sunrise, your body is being bombarded with all these incredible things. There's the sights, there's the cold. It was quite a frosty morning. I was stood there with Adam Gibbs, my great friend Adam, and you're having this real experience, the glory and majesty, and the mountain feels so large. And it seems to me that as soon as you compact that into a photograph, you somehow diminish things. You know, you're taking this beautiful landscape and you're crushing it into these four walls of a frame. So I think there was a period where we were trying to exaggerate perhaps the feelings and the emotions of the landscape by making them really just like a superlative, grand, majestic version of it. So this was a photograph that was a product of its time. This is now 7 years ago or 6.5 years ago that I made this photograph, and a lot has changed in popular photography in that time. But in this moment, this was kind of the version that I made, and understandably, you know, given that I was on 500px back then, and you know, social media was becoming more popular, and I was hanging around with Mark Adamus and people like that, the photograph was very popular. It was a very well received photograph. What makes it so, if you've followed this channel at all, or if you've read Luminosity and Contrast, or The Colour of Meaning, or my latest ebook, Creativity Superpowers, any of those books are going to tell you why this photograph would be generally perceived as a good photograph. Of course, personal taste comes into this. Some people are entirely entitled to hate it. A lot of people like this one. Pointy mountain, warm golden light, very strong atmosphere off on the left-hand side of the frame, plenty of contrast, plenty of detail, plenty of luminosity. All the things that I talk about when I'm trying to teach engagement, composition, and expressive photography. So it's a combination of all sorts of different elements that have come together to produce quite a harmonious and pleasing photograph, which is a reflection of the world as we see it. It's a colour photograph. We experience the world in colour generally, unless we have some issue with our vision. Come 2018, after my year in the Gobi Desert in 2017, when I went out there 3 times in that year, and also in 2018, I think I was there a couple of times. So I think I'd been 5 or 6 times to the Gobi Desert. And I started to develop my luminosity and contrast theory of engagement. And it was basically a book about black and white photography because I was taking colour out of the equation. And I made a version of this photograph that I will show you now. So this version of the photograph was made in 2018, so 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years after the initial photograph was made, the colour version. And of course, I was making a version of this photograph so that it would teach and express luminosity and contrast, the elements that I was trying to teach in the book, called Luminosity and Contrast. And as you can see, as soon as we remove colour from this photograph, it loses everything that made the colour version successful. It lost that golden glow, the cool to warm transitions, the seasonal element, the larch trees there, the yellow larch trees. You lose the golden meadow. All of those colour triggers that basically add energy to the scene. Warm colours, luminosity in warm colours, richness of colours, saturation. All of those things add our sense of engagement, or add to our sense of engagement. And as soon as you remove those, if you think about losing your vision, so let's say you've got your 5 senses. If you suddenly lose your vision, you may find that your sense of touch is enhanced. Your sense of smell may be enhanced. You compensate for the lack of something by an addition of something. And what we've done in this photograph, in the black and white version, is we have added to the luminosity the meadow. There's some dodging gone onto the meadow to lift some of the highlights. The mountain itself is decidedly more luminous. The fog has been made more luminous. The contrast is greater. The blacks are deeper. The whites are brighter. So we've stretched the histogram. We've dodged and burned to highlight some of that luminosity because I wanted to make an impactful, engaging photograph. So I've boosted things a little bit. If I skip back to the colour version now, you will see that there's a definite, the mountain isn't as bright. The trees aren't as bright. The meadow isn't as bright. And as we skip back and forth between the colour version and the black and white version, we can clearly see that the black and white version, ironically, has quite a lot of impact, because that impact is a function of its contrast. The bright snow, the luminosity, the deep shadows in the forests and in the foreground and in the reed bed there, and then the luminosity shining out from this big white triangle right in the centre of the frame. And then I've kind of done a bit more dodging and burning just to kind of increase impact, really. Would I process it like this today, another 4 years on from this black and white version? Probably not. I would probably process it in a different way because my taste has changed and what I want to say about the scene has changed. And this is a really important thing. You can't compare a colour version with a black and white version. And if I throw them both up on the frame, on the screen simultaneously, it should be very obvious from these two photographs that we can't compare colour photographs with black and white photographs. They have a completely different, it's a different vocabulary for a start. We give an entirely different emotional message. With the black and white photograph, we've lost the time of day trigger. We've lost the seasonal trigger to a certain extent. We've lost a sense of time. The colour version feels modern. It feels contemporary. The black and white version, there's almost a feeling that someone like Ansel Adams or someone of that genre or that era may have made a photograph like this as they explored the Rocky Mountains in the 1930s or 1940s. Black and white photography brings a timeless quality to it. There's a heritage to it. We feel as if we're on that fine art timeline that stretches right back to the earliest days of black and white photography. Colour, by its very nature, colour slide film was a very new thing at the back end of the 1960s into the 1970s. To have a colour photograph that was commercially common was brand new. And that is in my lifetime, just in the last 50 to 55 years. Colour in photography is something we totally take for granted now. Black and white is a way to express ourselves that removes us from that contemporary scene. I personally love black and white photography, and perhaps if I wasn't in the public eye most of the time and didn't have to worry so much about popularity, maybe I would just make more black and white photography, buy just a dedicated black and white digital camera. That would be something that I think I could really get on board with, if anybody wants to give me one. So I think this is one of the reasons I'm putting this out there today is I quite often see people posting a colour version and a black and white version, asking the question, which do you prefer? And to my mind, it's almost like putting an Indian curry and a salad, you know, or spaghetti bolognese or something, and saying, which one do you prefer? You're not comparing like with like. The colour version here is all about the seasons. It's about the autumn. It's about the early morning. It's about the atmosphere and the sort of feeling of that experience and the grandeur and majesty of the landscape. The black and white version is a celebration of luminosity, contrast, atmosphere, tone, impact, timelessness, the historical context. It's a more reflective, somewhat thoughtful version of that scene. I don't believe we can choose between them because they're saying different things. No doubt in the comments, if you wanted to dive in, some people will say love the colour version, love the black and white version, hate one or the other, hate them both, and that's all of course absolutely fine. Our preferences in the visual arts or any arts are totally subjective, and I'm not asking you to choose. I don't have a favourite between these two images, particularly because they both represent aspects of my personality. The one on the left maybe represents the slightly more confident and kind of egocentric, maybe. There's a bit more ego in the colour version. The black and white version, although I wouldn't process it perhaps like this today, certainly is a quieter and more thoughtful version of myself. I hope you find this type of video informative. As I said at the beginning of it, I'm away right now for a couple of weekends. I am going to be recording more video content in the field over the next 10 days while I'm away with my client, and intend to bring you more in the field type videos because we all want to be outside. I'd rather be outside than sat in front of the computer. Luminosity and Contrast. There are 3 ebooks I really want to urge you to investigate. If you're new to the channel, if you're new to my work, I wrote 3 ebooks that summarize my entire philosophy to landscape photography, how we see the world, why we point our camera at things, what we can learn from those preferences about us, and how to develop our own intuitive creativity rather than just copying other people or trying to be somebody else, because that will ultimately fail because you're best at being you. So I wrote 3 ebooks. Luminosity and Contrast came first in 2018. I released The Colour of Meaning in 2020, where I took the concept I'd started with Luminosity and Contrast and added colour. We can see from the image on the right just how powerful colour is as a trigger. As soon as we add it, it dominates. It will always dominate. It gives us the biggest punch in the stomach is the colour in a photograph. So I started with Luminosity and Contrast. I added colour in The Colour of Meaning. And then in the recent book that I just published in the autumn of 2021 there, Creativity Superpowers, is looking at how to compose like you, how to use everything we'd learned in the previous 2 books to build powerful, expressive, impactful, meaningful, just better photographs because they're your photographs. So please, please, please do yourself a favour and jump into the Expressive Photography store and check out those 3 ebooks. There are some other little products on there as well that you may get some value from. And the last thing I want to talk about, which I mentioned right at the beginning of this video, was the Expressive Photographers members channel. We've seen quite a surge of new members coming through, and the feedback we're getting is, I wish I'd found this place years ago, or I wish this place had existed years ago. It's the one place on the internet that you're going to get meaningful feedback on your photography rather than just great shot or someone just ripping the crap out of it because they disagree with what you've done. The Expressive Photography Members channel is somewhere that you can grow, express yourself, open up about your unique creativity, and be surrounded by a community of people who share the same values and the same concept that photography can be so good for us. It can release us from doubt, self-doubt, suffering, trying to please other people, trying to make photographs like other people, not really knowing why we're making photographs at all. So between the ebooks and the Expressive Photography Members channel, I really do believe that there's this really wide spectrum of opportunity for you to really grow your photography in 2022. Thanks for bearing with me, and if you've got this far, I really do appreciate it. If you've got this far, I don't need to tell you to subscribe, I guess. I would have thought you would have already had, but you can still give us a thumbs up, and if you want to dive into the comments, I really love reading them, even though I don't get the time really to answer everyone, perhaps as I used to a couple of years ago. I'm recording this the day before I leave to go on my private workshop, so I am still here, but I am very soon not to be here. Take care, everyone. Thanks for everyone who's signed up to subscribe to us recently. The channel is really starting to grow very rapidly now, and I appreciate every single one of you who has done so. That's it for today. Have a look at some of your photographs. Take the colour ones and turn them into black and white and see how they feel. Really examine that relationship between the colour version and the black and white version and feel the difference, because that will tell you how to progress maybe a little with photographs that are going to be more like you. Thanks for listening to my never-ending waffle. I really appreciate it. Bye for now.